All right, so we've got this really interesting question that came in.
Okay.
It's about modern India,
Okay.
the nation that gained independence back in 1947.
Mm-hmm.
And the question is about whether the current generation, in a way, are still kind of like educated slaves to corporate interests
Mm-hmm.
and how that mindset might have changed since 1947.
Yeah, definitely a lot to unpack there. It's a question that really gets at like the core of, how a society grows, but how much individual freedom people really have.
Right, exactly. And this whole thing is even more relevant now because of, well, Infosys co-founder Narayan Murthy.
Oh, right, yeah.
Yeah, so he kind of threw a bit of a bomb out there,
You did.
suggesting Indian youth should be ready to work at this 70 hours a week.
Wow.
70. And his reasoning, well, he says it's to like supercharge national productivity,
Okay.
get India really up there on the global stage.
Mm.
And of course, this, well, it ignited a firestorm.
Oh, yeah, it's been all over the news, social media, everyone's got an opinion.
Exactly, exactly. But what I find really interesting is it's not just about the 70 hours,
Yeah.
right? It's about what it represents. Like, is that the answer?
Yeah, like what are the other options? How else could India boost productivity, but, without burning everyone out?
Right, because well-being matters too.
Absolutely.
Okay, but before we get into all of that, let's just lay out Murthy's argument, kind of step by step.
Okay, sounds good.
So he said all this during a podcast interview,
Mm-hmm.
and he pointed out that compared to some other countries, India's work productivity is, well, relatively low.
Yeah, and his point is, if young people are really truly dedicated to their country's progress, they should be willing to put in those extra hours, really go the extra mile.
He even brought up Prime Minister Modi,
Oh, right.
like how Modi reportedly works like 100 hours a week.
Wow.
And Murthy's saying, look, that level of dedication, that's a big part of success.
So it's not just him, like this is a philosophy, a way of thinking.
Right, and actually, Pavish Agarwal, the Ola Cabs co-founder, he jumped in too.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he tweeted something like, it's not time for leisure, it's time to go all in and build in one generation what others built over many.
Wow. That's a pretty strong statement.
Yeah, and it really captures that like urgency that a lot of people feel about India's future.
I get it, yeah.
But on the flip side, there's been a lot of pushback against this whole long hours equals progress thing.
Oh, absolutely. There's this growing worry that praising extreme work hours, glorifying it, actually leads to burnout.
Right.
And that puts people's health at risk, both physical and mental. And, in some cases, it's even led to, well, tragic outcomes.
Yeah, like that young EY employee in Pune.
Oh, right. That was awful.
So sad. And the employee's mother even wrote a letter to EY,
Oh, wow.
blaming the company for the, intense work pressure, saying that's what led to her daughter's death.
Yeah, it makes you think, are we just focusing on hours worked? Like that's the only thing that matters.
Right, instead of looking at what people actually get done, the results, and how efficiently they do it. And it feels like maybe we're kind of stuck in this old way of thinking about productivity, especially with how fast technology is changing things.
Right, exactly.
Like Ashnir Grover, the former MD of Virat, even tweeted about this.
Oh, what did he say?
Something like, I think people got offended because work is still measured in hours rather than outcomes.
Interesting. He's saying maybe it's time to rethink the whole thing, how we measure productivity.
Okay, so let's back up a bit. Remember the question we started with.
Yeah.
It brought up this idea, why not focus on increasing manpower?
Okay, yeah.
To keep the work week reasonable, 48 hours,
Mm-hmm.
instead of pushing everyone to 70.
And that's a really valid point, right? It goes back to some of the big challenges India's dealing with. Some experts are saying, instead of piling on the hours for the people who already have jobs,
Yeah.
India should be focusing on making sure its huge workforce has the right skills and creating more job opportunities.
Right, because think about it. The unemployment rate in India, it's not like everyone's already working 70 hours a week.
Exactly.
Imagine how much productivity could go up if more people were actually contributing to the economy.
Right, so maybe the issue isn't that people aren't willing to work, it's that the system isn't letting them contribute effectively.
And of course, we can't ignore the health risks that come with a 70-hour work week.
Oh, absolutely not. I mean, think about it. There's barely any time left for sleep, exercise, or even just relaxing and connecting with people you care about.
Right, and all the research shows that long-term stress, lack of sleep, they're terrible for you, both physically and mentally.
Oh, yeah, no question. And Dr. Sudhir Kumar, he's a senior neurologist in Hyderabad.
Okay.
He went as far as to say CEOs who push for these super long work hours they're putting profits ahead of their employees' well-being.
He's not holding back.
Nope. He specifically talked about the increased risk of stroke, heart disease, even dying younger, all because of working 70 hours a week.
It's a pretty sobering thought.
It is. Makes you wonder, is this really what we're asking our young people to do for their country's progress? Sacrifice their health, their personal lives, for what, just to make companies more money?
Those are some tough questions. But, in fairness to Murthy, he's not saying this is just tea about company profits.
Right.
He really believes that this kind of dedication, it's vital for India to grow, to compete with countries like China, with their really intense work cultures.
It's complicated, right? Like, what's the right way to develop a country in today's world? Are we just looking at the economy, or do things like well-being, happiness, individual fulfillment, do those matter too?
It's like, what's the point of all the money if you don't have your health?
Right, exactly.
So even if working 70 hours could boost the economy,
Mm-hmm.
is that the right kind of growth?
Yeah, if it's at the cost of people's well-being.
Right. And actually, there's more and more evidence that a burnt-out, overworked workforce, they're less productive in the long run.
Yeah, it kind of backfires.
So even the economic argument might not hold up. Are there any studies that specifically show this?
Oh, for sure. Like, there's this 2021 study by the World Health Organization and the International Labor Organization.
Okay.
They found that working 55 hours or more a week increases your risk of stroke by 35%
Wow.
and dying from heart disease by 17%.
Okay, so that's pretty scary. Working 70 hours could be bad, not just for individuals, but for the whole economy.
Right, exactly. It shows we need to look deeper beyond these simple solutions and think about all the different things that make a country successful.
Okay, so if working ourselves to death isn't the answer, what are some other ways to boost productivity? You mentioned upskilling the workforce earlier.
Yeah, so India has a massive pool of talented young people, right? But a lot of them don't have the specific skills needed for the jobs of the future.
Right.
So investing in education, training programs, particularly in areas like tech, data science, digital literacy, that could really boost the workforce's capabilities and, in turn, lead to increased productivity.
Yeah, that makes a lot more sense than just telling everyone to work longer.
Right.
So what else can we do to make work in India more productive and more fulfilling?
Well, creating an environment where innovation and entrepreneurship can flourish, that's huge.
Okay.
And that might mean policies that encourage startups, easier access to funding and mentorship, and, cutting down on those bureaucratic processes that can really stifle new businesses.
Because I've heard those bureaucratic hurdles can be a real nightmare for entrepreneurs.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Streamlining those processes could really unlock a wave of innovation and make the economy more dynamic and competitive.
Okay, so we've talked about boosting the workforce and fostering innovation, but we keep coming back to this idea of well-being.
Right, it's so important.
So what role should companies play in that?
I think corporations have a responsibility to create workplaces that actively support employee well-being. That means promoting a healthy work-life balance, encouraging people to take breaks and vacations,
Yeah.
and building a culture of respect and open communication, a place where employees feel comfortable speaking up if something's wrong.
So it sounds like we're talking about a big shift in how we view work, its place in our lives. Are you saying we need to move away from that always-on 24/7 culture?
Yeah, I think so. It's about recognizing that people have lives outside of work, and those lives matter.
Right.
Taking care of your physical and mental health, that actually makes you a more productive employee in the long run.
So it's not about being ambitious or dedicated. It's about being smart and sustainable.
Exactly. Working smarter, not just harder. Everyone has limits. And it's
Uh-huh.
about recognizing that everyone has limits.
Right, right. Speaking of limits, we haven't really talked about the mental health side of things with a 70-hour work week. Seems like that could really mess with people's minds.
Yeah, no doubt. When your body is constantly under stress, it's pumping out those hormones, cortisol, adrenaline, and over time, that can really do a number on you.
So what are we talking about specifically? Like what mental health risks come with those crazy hours?
Well, the research is pretty clear. Working too much is linked to higher rates of anxiety and depression, burnout, obviously, and even in some cases, suicidal thoughts. It's like you're forcing yourself to run a marathon every week. Eventually, you're going to hit a wall, and the mental and emotional crash can be just as bad as any physical injury.
Makes sense. So if someone's in that situation, working those crazy hours, what can they do to protect their mental health?
The first thing is recognizing that your mental health is just as important as your physical health. You wouldn't ignore a broken leg, right? So don't ignore those warning signs of burnout.
Like what kinds of signs?
Well, things like exhaustion, obviously, feeling irritable all the time, having trouble concentrating, losing motivation for things you used to enjoy, those are all red flags.
Okay, so what if someone's already feeling those things? What should they do?
If you're feeling overwhelmed, reach out for help. Don't try to tough it out alone. Talk to someone you trust, a friend, a family member, or maybe find a therapist, a counselor. There are also mental health hotlines you can call. There are resources out there to support you. Remember, you're not alone in this.
Yeah, and it's a sign of strength to ask for help, not a weakness.
Exactly. Taking care of yourself, I is strong.
Okay, good point. And speaking of strength, we should probably circle back to something else from the original question.
Okay.
Remember how it asked what corporations should be doing about unemployment in India?
Right, yeah.
Seems kind of contradictory, right?
Yeah.
Expecting young people to work 70 hours a week.
Uh-huh.
Well, there are so many people without jobs in the first place.
Absolutely. It can't just be about squeezing more and more out of the people who already have jobs. If we're asking individuals to make sacrifices for the country, corporations have to step up too.
Right, it has to be a two-way street.
Exactly. We can't just put all the burden on individuals while companies prioritize profits above everything else.
And I think this is where that educated slaves idea really comes into play.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
If we're expecting young people to be so incredibly dedicated, to put in those long hours, then companies need to show they're committed too.
Right.
Fair compensation, a healthy work environment, opportunities for growth and advancement.
Exactly. It's got to be a give and take. If people feel valued and respected, they're more likely to be motivated and productive.
Okay, good point. But shifting gears a bit, we've talked a lot about mental health and the risks of overwork, but what about the physical side of things?
Oh, yeah, I can't forget about that.
We know that long-term stress takes a toll on the body. So what are some of the specific physical health risks we're talking about with a 70-hour work week?
Well, like I said before, stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline are constantly flooding your system when you're overworked. And over time, that can lead to a whole cascade of problems.
Give us the specifics.
Okay, for starters, chronic stress increases your risk of cardiovascular problems, high blood pressure, heart disease, stroke. It also weakens your immune system, makes you more likely to get sick.
So not only are you working yourself to the bone, you're also more likely to get sick on top of it.
Right, exactly. And that's not all. Stress can also mess with your digestion, things like irritable bowel syndrome, ulcers, even just heartburn. It can disrupt your sleep, leading to insomnia, fatigue, making it harder to concentrate. Oh, and don't forget about musculoskeletal problems too. All
Yeah.
those hours sitting at a desk can lead to muscle tension, back pain, you name it.
That's a pretty long list of potential health problems. Sounds like working 70 hours a week could really jeopardize your physical well-being in the long run.
It's definitely a risk. And remember, that's just a sample platter of what chronic stress can do. It can impact the body in so many ways. It's a real recipe for all sorts of health issues down the line.
Yeah, not good. So it seems like this 70-hour work week proposal could backfire not just in terms of productivity and mental health, but also physical health.
It's a real possibility. And it really underscores the need to find a more balanced approach to work, one that recognizes individual health and well-being as essential factors in national progress.
Okay, so you mentioned earlier that chronic stress weakens the immune system. Has there been any research specifically on how long work hours affect immunity?
Oh, yeah. There was this study published in the journal Psychoneuroendocrinology, and they found that people who work long hours have fewer antibodies to the common cold virus.
Interesting.
Yeah, meaning their immune systems weren't as good at fighting off infections.
So basically, those long hours could actually make you more likely to catch a cold.
It's definitely possible, which just reinforces how important it is to manage stress and take care of your health, even when work is demanding.
Okay, so we've talked about immunity, but you also mentioned how stress disrupts sleep patterns. How important is sleep, really? And what happens when we don't get enough?
Sleep is absolutely essential for both your physical and mental health. And when you're chronically sleep deprived, there's a whole cascade of negative effects. Well, for starters, it messes with your brain, makes it harder to concentrate, make decisions, remember things. Your mood goes haywire. You're more irritable, more anxious, even depressed. And like we talked about before, your immune system takes a hit, so you're more likely to get sick.
So not only are you mentally and emotionally drained, but you're putting your physical health at risk too.
Exactly. And don't forget about the increased risk of accidents. When you're drowsy, it impairs your driving, increases the chances of other accidents, which can have some pretty serious consequences.
Yeah, it sounds like sleep is even more crucial than we often realize.
It is. It's a fundamental human need. We need to treat it with the same importance as we treat other aspects of our lives.
Okay, so given how busy and demanding life is these days, how can we actually make sure we're getting enough sleep?
One of the most important things is setting a regular sleep schedule. Try to go to bed and wake up around the same time every day, even on weekends.
I've heard that before,
Mhm.
but it's so hard to stick to it, especially with work, family, social stuff.
I know it's not always easy, but even small adjustments to your sleep schedule can make a big difference. It helps regulate your body's natural sleep-wake cycle.
Okay, so what else can we do? Any other tips for better sleep?
Yeah, definitely. Creating a relaxing bedtime routine can be really helpful. Wind down an hour or two before bed, take a warm bath, read a book, listen to some calming music, anything that helps you relax.
Yeah, I can see how that would be a good way to de-stress and get ready for sleep.
Right. And make your bedroom a sleep sanctuary. Keep it dark, quiet, and cool. Also, try to avoid electronic devices for at least an hour before bed.
Oof, that's a tough one. I'm so used to scrolling through my phone before I go to sleep.
I know it's a hard habit to break, but that blue light from your devices can really mess with your sleep.
Okay, I'm willing to give it a try. Any other tips?
Limit caffeine and alcohol before bed. They can interfere with sleep quality. And lastly, if you're having persistent trouble sleeping, it's always a good idea to talk to your doctor. They can rule out any underlying medical conditions and give you personalized advice.
That's great advice. So we've covered a lot about sleep, and it seems like getting enough rest is a major part of staying healthy, both physically and mentally, especially when you're dealing with a demanding job.
Couldn't agree more. Sleep is not a luxury, it's a necessity. We need to start treating it that way.
Absolutely. Okay, so I want to shift gears a bit and talk about something we've touched on a few times already, work-life balance.
Okay, let's explore that.
The term work-life balance gets thrown around a lot, but I think it's important to define what it really means, especially in the context of this 70-hour work week debate.
Right, because it's not just about dividing your time evenly between work and your personal life. It's about finding a rhythm that allows you to thrive in all areas of your life.
So it's about finding that sweet spot where you're engaged and fulfilled at work, but you also have time and energy for your relationships, your hobbies, your own well-being.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that this balance looks different for everyone. There's no one-size-fits-all approach.
Right, we all have different priorities, values, and commitments.
Exactly. What's a healthy balance for one person might not work for another. It's so important to be mindful of your own individual needs and limits.
So don't compare yourself to others. What matters is what works for you. But how do you actually find that balance? What are some practical steps you can take?
Well, it starts with figuring out what's truly important to you. Spend some time thinking about your values, what brings you joy and fulfillment. Once you have a clear understanding of your priorities, you can start making choices that support those values.
So it's about being intentional, making choices that align with what you truly value.
Exactly. And once you've defined your priorities, it's time to set some boundaries.
Okay, what do you mean by boundaries?
I'm talking about establishing clear lines between work time and personal time. Maybe you turn off your work notifications after a certain hour, maybe designate specific times for checking email, or maybe you create a dedicated workspace that's physically separate from your living space.
So it's about creating some mental and physical separation between work and the rest of your life.
Exactly. And it's about communicating those boundaries to your colleagues, your clients, and even your family. Let them know when you're available and when you're not.
And like we talked about earlier, it's about prioritizing self-care.
Absolutely. Make time for activities that help you recharge and reconnect with yourself. Exercise, meditation, spending time in nature, reading, pursuing hobbies, whatever helps you feel grounded and energized.
Yeah, those all sound like great ways to prevent burnout.
They are. And lastly, don't be afraid to communicate your needs to your employer and your loved ones. Be open and honest about your need for work-life balance. Don't be afraid to ask for what you need, whether it's flexible work arrangements, time off, or just more support.
It sounds like finding work-life balance is an ongoing process, something that requires constant awareness and adjustment.
It is. It's not a destination, it's a journey. But it's a journey that's worth taking.
Because ultimately, it's about creating a life that's both successful and fulfilling, right?
Exactly. And that's a goal worth striving for.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about individual well-being and work-life balance, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the bigger picture. What does this whole debate tell us about India today? Where is it headed?
That's a great question. I think this debate is a reflection of a larger shift that's happening globally, not just in India. We're questioning old ideas about success, about work-life balance, about the very role of work in our lives.
It's interesting because for so long, the message was all about hustle culture, working long hours, sacrificing everything for your career. But it seems like that message is starting to change.
It is. People are realizing that there's more to life than just work. They're starting to prioritize their mental health, their relationships, and their passions.
And that's not a bad thing, right? It doesn't mean people are getting lazy or less ambitious. It just means they're redefining their priorities. They're looking for a more balanced and fulfilling life.
Exactly. And I think the shift is especially relevant in India, where there's this strong cultural emphasis on hard work and sacrifice. It's not about rejecting those values, it's about finding a way to integrate them into a more modern, more sustainable work culture.
It's about finding that balance, that harmony between ambition and well-being.
Precisely. And that's the challenge for India moving forward. How do we tap into the energy and talent of our workforce while also creating a society that values individual well-being? How do we allow people to thrive in all aspects of their lives?
And it's a challenge that everyone needs to be a part of, right?
Yeah.
Individuals, corporations, policymakers, we all have a role to play in shaping a more sustainable and fulfilling work culture.
I completely agree. It's a collective effort. And it starts with conversations like these, with questioning assumptions, exploring alternatives, and challenging those outdated models.
Well said. And hopefully, through these conversations, we can find a way forward that leads to both national progress and the individual fulfillment. It seems like finding that balance between national progress and individual well-being is a key theme that keeps emerging in our conversation.
It really is. And I think it speaks to a larger question, like what really makes a nation successful?
Right. As we dig deeper into this topic, I keep coming back to that fundamental question. Is it just about economic growth, global dominance, or is there something more to it?
It's a question philosophers and economists have been debating for ages. I think the answer is more nuanced than just picking one or the other.
So it's not an either-or situation.
No, I don't think so. A truly successful nation, it aims for balance, a blend of economic prosperity, social well-being, and the individual fulfillment.
So it's about creating a society where people can pursue their passions, build meaningful relationships, live healthy and fulfilling lives, all while contributing to the nation's growth.
Exactly. It's about creating a society that values individual well-being just as much as collective advancement.
And that brings us back to the 70-hour workweek debate. It seems like this whole proposal is rooted in the idea that economic growth trumps everything, even individual well-being.
That's one way to look at it, but I think we have to acknowledge that economic growth is essential for national development. It provides resources for things like education, healthcare, infrastructure.
So we can't just completely dismiss economic growth.
No, we can't. But we also can't ignore the human cost of pursuing it at all costs. We need to find that balance.
And that balance means recognizing the value of individual well-being, not just as an end in itself, but as a crucial factor in achieving sustainable economic growth.
Exactly. A healthy, educated, and motivated workforce is essential for a thriving economy.
So it's not about choosing between economic growth and individual well-being. It's about recognizing that they're interconnected and reinforce each other.
Precisely. It's about creating a positive feedback loop. Economic growth fuels individual well-being, which then leads to further economic growth.
Okay, so you spent a lot of time studying economic models. Are there any countries that have actually managed to strike this balance,
Yeah.
achieve both economic success and a high level of social well-being?
Yes, definitely. The Scandinavian countries are often held up as models of sustainable development. They consistently rank high in both economic prosperity and social well-being.
So what's their secret? What are they doing differently?
Well, for one thing, they've invested heavily in education, healthcare, and social safety nets. They also have strong labor unions that fight for workers' rights, and a culture that really values work-life balance.
So it's not just about government policies, it's also about cultural values and social norms.
Exactly. It's a holistic approach. They've aligned their economic policies, social structures, and cultural values to create a society that prioritizes individual well-being and collective progress.
Sounds challenging, but also incredibly rewarding.
It is. But I think it's an approach worth striving for.
Okay, so bringing this back to India, given our unique culture and current economic situation, what steps can we take to move towards this kind of balanced and sustainable development?
That's a tough question. There's no easy answer. But there are a few key areas we can focus on. First, investing in human capital has to be a priority.
Okay.
That means investing in education, healthcare, and skills training, giving individuals the tools they need to thrive in a world that's constantly changing.
So investing in people, essentially.
Exactly. And we also need to promote entrepreneurship and innovation, make it easier for people to take risks, start businesses, create jobs.
Makes sense.
That means cutting red tape, simplifying regulations, providing access to funding and mentorship.
Yeah, those all sound like crucial steps towards building a more dynamic and competitive economy.
They are, and we can't forget about strengthening social safety nets. Everyone, regardless of their job or income, should have access to a basic level of security and support.
Right, creating a more equitable and just society.
Exactly. And finally, we need to foster a culture of work-life balance.
Okay.
That means promoting policies that allow for flexibility, things like telecommuting, flex time, compressed work weeks. It also means recognizing the importance of vacation time and encouraging employees to actually use it.
So it's about creating a work culture that values individual well-being, recognizes that people have lives outside of work.
Exactly. It's about creating a work environment where people can truly thrive in all aspects of their lives.
Those are all great points. And it seems like these kinds of policies can benefit both workers and the economy as a whole.
Exactly. When people are healthy, happy, and supported, they're more productive, more engaged, and more innovative. And that, in turn, leads to a stronger, more vibrant economy.
It's that virtuous cycle again, individual well-being and economic prosperity working together. Now, I want to come back to something you mentioned earlier about the role of cultural values and social norms in shaping work culture. India has a long tradition of hard work and sacrifice. Those values are deeply embedded in our society.
They are, and they've served us well in many ways. But as the world changes and work itself changes, we need to find ways to integrate those traditional values with the need for a more balanced and sustainable work culture.
So it's not about rejecting our cultural heritage. It's about adapting and evolving.
Exactly. For example, seva, or selfless service, is a core value in Indian culture. And we can reinterpret that to include service not just to our families and communities, but also to ourselves.
That's interesting. So taking care of your own well-being can be seen as a form of seva.
Absolutely. When you prioritize your own health and happiness, you're better able to serve others.
And that actually aligns really well with Indian culture. We're taught to care for our elders, support our families, contribute to the well-being of our communities.
Right, and that same care and compassion can be extended to ourselves.
It's realizing you can't pour from an empty cup. You have to replenish your own reserves of energy and well-being so you can truly be of service to others.
Well said. And I think that's a powerful message for India. We can embrace our tradition of hard work and sacrifice while also recognizing the importance of self-care and work-life balance.
Finding that sweet spot, that harmony where tradition meets modernity, where individual well-being supports collective progress, and where we create a society that's both prosperous and fulfilling.
Exactly. And that's a vision worth striving for.
Okay, so as we talk about these changes in work culture and values, I'm curious about the role of education in all of this.
All right, let's bring education into the mix.
It seems like education not only shapes our skills and knowledge, but also our values and beliefs about work.
You're right. Education can either reinforce or challenge societal norms. And I think we need to use education to promote a more balanced and sustainable approach to work and life.
Okay, so how do we do that? How can we use education to help shift the culture towards a more balanced and fulfilling work-life integration?
Well, for starters, we can weave in concepts of work-life balance, stress management, and self-care into the curriculum at every level, starting with primary school all the way to university.
So start early. Instill these values in kids from a young age.
Exactly. And we need to encourage critical thinking. Teach students to question assumptions, analyze information, and form their own opinions about work and life.
I like that. It's about fostering a sense of agency and independent thinking. What else?
Highlight diverse role models. People who have achieved success while prioritizing their well-being and living balanced lives.
Yeah, that's important. Show young people that there are different paths to success. You don't have to burn yourself out to reach your goals.
Exactly. And we should encourage experiential learning, too. Give students real-world experience through internships, apprenticeships, volunteer work. Help them develop practical skills and understand the demands and rewards of the workplace.
Those are great suggestions. It sounds like education could play a crucial role, not only in preparing students for the workforce, but also in creating a more sustainable and humane work culture for everyone.
I agree. Education is a powerful tool for change. And I think it's time we used it more deliberately to promote a vision of work and life that prioritizes individual well-being and collective progress.
I love that. It's about creating a world where work isn't seen as a burden or a sacrifice, but as a chance for growth, creativity, and fulfillment.
Exactly. And we all have a part to play in shaping that world, both as individuals and as a society.
As we wrap up this deep dive into the 70-hour work week debate, I keep thinking about individual choice. Even in a system that might favor long hours or a culture that glorifies overwork, we still have the power to make decisions that reflect our own values and priorities.
Absolutely. We're not just passive bystanders. We have the power to design our lives, make choices that reflect what truly matters to us. So even if you're in a demanding job, you can still set boundaries, prioritize your well-being, make time for the things that bring you joy.
Exactly. You can choose to work smarter, not just harder. You can choose to prioritize your health and happiness. You can choose to create a work life that feels good and supports your overall well-being.
It's about taking back control of your time, your energy, your focus, and putting those resources toward the things that matter most to you.
It is. And it's about recognizing that real success isn't about what other people think. It's about how you feel. It's about living a life that feels meaningful and authentic to you.
That's a really powerful message. It's about understanding that you have more agency than you might think. You can shape your own life, even within a system or a culture that might not always support your choices.
Exactly, and even small changes can make a big difference. If each of us makes more conscious choices about how we work and live, it can have a ripple effect and slowly shift the culture towards a more balanced and sustainable way of being. I like that. It's about being the change you want to see in the world, starting with yourself. And it's about supporting each other along the way.
Absolutely. We need to create communities of support where people can talk about their struggles, celebrate their wins, and encourage each other to prioritize their well-being.
So it's about remembering that you're not alone on this journey. We're all in this together.
Absolutely. And together, I believe we can create a future of work that's both productive and fulfilling, a future where work isn't a burden, but a chance for growth, creativity, and connection.
That's a beautiful vision. Definitely something worth striving for.
It is.
We've talked a lot about the downsides of this 70-hour work week, but I want to be fair to those who support the idea. They say this level of dedication is crucial for India to compete globally. What are your thoughts on that?
It's complicated. It raises big questions about what progress really means and how work relates to national development.
So it's not a black and white issue.
Definitely not. Hard work and dedication have been a big part of India's growth. That's undeniable.
But is that the only way to succeed in today's world?
That's the question we need to ask. Is pushing for economic growth at the expense of individual well-being sustainable? Or is there another way, a way to have both economic success and a good quality of life for everyone?
Sounds like those are the kind of questions India needs to be thinking about as it moves forward.
Absolutely. We need a national conversation about what kind of society we want, what we value, and how work fits into our lives.
As we talk about this, I'm struck by how much the world has changed since India's independence in 1947.
For sure. The world's more interconnected, more complex. Work has transformed with technology, globalization, and automation.
And those changes have deeply affected India.
They have. India's become a global economic power, but that growth has come with its own problems, like rising inequality, damage to the environment, and a lot of anxiety and uncertainty.
So how can India balance its desire for economic growth with the need for a society that's fair and sustainable?
That's the big challenge. And I think it requires a change in thinking, both individually and as a society. We have to move beyond just focusing on GDP and start prioritizing things like well-being, happiness, taking care of the environment.
So real progress isn't just about numbers, it's about the quality of life for everyone.
Right. It's about creating a society where everyone has a chance to thrive, not just a select few.
And that brings us back to that question you raised at the beginning. Do you think modern India, after gaining independence, is still, in some ways, educated slaves to corporate interests?
It's a tough one. It's not a simple yes or no. There are definitely forces at play that can create that dynamic, especially in today's global economy where corporations have a lot of power.
So what can we do to push back against those forces? How can India create a fairer balance between corporations and individuals?
It's going to take a multi-pronged approach. Strengthening labor laws, promoting ethical business practices, empowering people to advocate for their rights.
And changing cultural attitudes too, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. Moving away from glorifying overwork and starting to value things like work-life balance, personal well-being, and being active in our communities.
Yeah, I like that. It's about recognizing that we're all inherently valuable as human beings, regardless of our jobs or how much money we make.
Exactly, and building a society that supports and celebrates those values.
As we're talking about this need for cultural change, it makes me think about the power of storytelling.
How so?
Well, stories shape our beliefs, our values, how we see the world. I think we need new stories about work, stories that celebrate balance, well-being, and finding meaning in what we do.
I agree. We need stories that challenge the idea that we have to constantly hustle and overwork. Stories that show you can be successful and fulfilled without sacrificing your health and happiness.
And we need to share those stories, get them out there so they can inspire people and shift the conversation.
Absolutely. It's time to change the story about work, create a new one that puts human well-being alongside economic growth.
It's about creating a new narrative, a new story for what work can be in India.
Exactly. It's about imagining a future where work isn't something that stresses you out, drains you, but something that gives you meaning, purpose, a sense of fulfillment.
And that vision, it means we have to challenge some pretty deep-rooted ideas about what it means to be successful, how work fits into that.
It does. We've got to move away from this belief that your worth is tied to how much you produce, how many hours you grind. We need a broader definition of success, one that includes well-being, happiness, feeling connected to something bigger than yourself.
It's about remembering that we're not just robots programmed to work. We're human beings with hearts and souls,
Yeah.
and we need to feel connected and like our lives have meaning.
Exactly. And it's time we started putting those needs front and center. We need a society that values people for who they are, not just for what they can produce.
Earlier you said that education could help create a more balanced and sustainable work culture. I'd love to hear more about that.
Sure, I think education can be a game changer in how we view work. It can help us question those old beliefs about overwork and achievement being the only way, and show young people that there are other ways to think about work and life.
So it's not just about giving young people the skills to get a job. It's about helping them develop a healthy and sustainable relationship with work itself.
Right. It's about empowering them to make choices that match their own values and priorities.
So how do we actually make that happen? How do we get these ideas into the education system?
Well, we can start by talking about things like work-life balance, stress management, self-care. Make those topics part of the curriculum from elementary school all the way to college.
So normalize these conversations, make them part of what kids learn from a young age.
Exactly. We need to help young people understand that taking care of their mental and physical health isn't weak. It's actually a sign of strength. Give them the tools and the knowledge to thrive in a world that often glorifies busyness and overwork.
Right. It's about giving them the tools and the permission to create a different kind of work life, one that feels good and supports their overall well-being. What else can we do?
We need to show them different kinds of role models. People who have achieved success but haven't had to sacrifice their well-being or live unbalanced lives to get there.
Yeah, it's about showing them you don't have to burn out to reach your goals,
Yeah.
that there are different paths to success.
Right. And we need to encourage them to question things, to not just accept the way things are.
What do you mean by that?
Teach them to think critically, to question assumptions and beliefs that are often presented as facts, to challenge systems and structures that keep unhealthy work cultures going.
It's about giving them the power to be the change, to imagine and create a different kind of world.
Exactly. And it's about making sure they have the support and resources they need to make those changes happen.
These are all fantastic ideas. It seems like education has a crucial role, not just in getting students ready for jobs, but in building a better, more sustainable work culture for the future.
I agree. Education can be such a powerful force for change, and we need to start using it more intentionally to promote a vision of work and life where individual well-being and collective progress go hand in hand.
I love that. It's about creating a world where work isn't seen as a burden or a sacrifice, but as a chance to grow, be creative, and find something meaningful.
Exactly. And that's something we all have a part in, both individually and as a society.
Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive. This has been a really thought-provoking conversation. Thanks for sharing your insights with us.
It's been a pleasure.
And to all of you listening, thanks for joining us on this journey. We hope this conversation got you thinking and maybe even inspired you to make some positive changes in your own lives. Remember, knowledge is power, but so is taking care of yourselves. Until next time, keep diving deep and keep living well.